The Democratic Republicans and the Federalists had very different views about how to solve the financial crisis of the 1790s. Some of the major players in the economic and financial debate were Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson on the side of the Democratic Republicans, and Alexander Hamilton, as well as Biddle, um, in the side of the Federalists. For the Democratic Republicans, they believe that the government should be less involved in the ways that we were handling the economy and handling money and economic power in this nation. They believe that having a federal bank went against the Constitution and gave a level of power to the bank that had not been established within the Constitution and was not under constitutional rights. They also believed that the creation of a federal bank would allow for wealthy elite people to become even more wealthy and increase the disparities between those who were poor and did not own any land and those who were already wealthy and were stakeholders of the bank's um, Federal Reserve and economic power. They ultimately, I believe that the states should have more power over the control of the banks, that the small banks should have more power over the economic and financial situation in the nation than that of a singular major federal bank. In addition to this, the Democratic Republicans also believe that it was because of the federal bank or the power of big banks that the Panic of 1819 had occurred because the banks were lending money irresponsibly. They were hoarding gold and they were focused on saving themselves above helping their customers or the smaller banks that were lending to them. And they also believed that the use of these big banks, of the federal banks, would end up giving corrupt power to politicians because they would be able to sway politicians in favor of what they wanted based on economic needs. Another belief held by the Democratic Republicans was that the British stockholders of the Bank of the United States would not have the best interest of Americans in mind. They would instead be focused on their own economic gain and economic power, which is not fair to all of the US people who are counting on the bank to help regulate the economy and provide, a financial gain for everybody of the US. They strongly believed that ultimately the stockholders of the bank would be focused on their own self interest and on protecting themselves based on the actions that the banks had had in the past. And they believed for these reasons that it was not in the best interest of the everyday American to have these big banks be in power and have these big banks be making the decisions of the financial standing of the US and to give them that level of power and control over the economy while everyday people would have so little of it. The people who opposed Andrew Jackson and other Democratic Republicans were called the Federalists, and some major players were Alexander Hamilton, who was the Secretary of Treasury, and Nicholas Biddle, who was the head of the Bank of the United States. During the 1790s, the Federalists believed that the amount of power that the government was using to create this big bank was exactly what the government was designed to do. And they felt that it was necessary in order to maintain and sustain the economy for there to be one national bank that um, kind of evened out and decided what the economic worth of all of the paper funds and paper money that was being used at the time would be worth, and a main location for the gold and the silver to be held and valued in the nation. The Federalists also believed that the policies of Andrew Jackson would lead to the majority of people who are landowners and had wealth to end up funding people who were lazy, according to these Federalists. and were afraid of there being a redistribution, essentially, of money where their money would be redistributed to commoners and people who did not own land and did not have as much money and who they presumed to be lazy because they were not of equal standing economically as them. Through the creation of a federal bank, the Federalists helped the U.S. prevent themselves from going into bankruptcy in the late 1780s. They also set the stage for current present day American capitalism and a republic that was creditworthy. Um, and they promoted commerce through the use of the federal bank, as well as highlighting stock market growth and helping promote stock market growth. Another hope that Federalists held was hope for the fact that the use of a federal bank would discourage small banks from continuing to be irresponsible about their use of paper notes and having a more regulated economy in terms of the value of paper notes and the value of gold and silver as the primary source of money for the nation. Both the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists' decision to support either not having a federal bank or having a federal bank had a lot to do with their social attitudes of who needed to benefit the most from an established economic structure. For the Democratic Republicans, they felt that establishing an economic structure was meant to benefit the everyday people of this nation, the people who were landowners as well as people who were not landowners, and hoped that people who weren't landowners could one day, aspire to become so. But they felt that the creation of a federal bank would not allow them to do so and would just create bigger disparities and a lower chance for people who are poor to move up in society economically. However, on the opposite end, the Federalists believed that deserved money only from their idea of working hard and that working hard would lead to economic gain. And so anybody who did not have financial gain and did not have good financial standing and was not wealthy was solely not wealthy because they were lazy and they were not working hard and expected handouts. These mindsets were very much part of what influenced the decisions in terms of having a federal bank because the federal bank was owned 80% by stockholders and only 20% by the government. So those 80% stockholders who were wealthy people would just increase their wealth and continue to be the people in charge of financial responsibility of the nation and the financial structure of the nation, which shows that the benefit that they wanted was mainly for those people and then for the politicians that would have some economic benefit from having this federal bank and be corrupt and be influenced by the economic aspects of the bank. A lot of these disparities can still be seen in society today, seeing how we did end up having federal banks throughout history. The people who were poor were just maintaining their status as being poor, and the economic wealth disparities increased as Jackson had believed that they would, and Jefferson had believed that they would. The economic structure that existed in the past also made it so that women were cheap labor and earned less money than men at the time, which is something that we still have to deal with the effects of that today because women continue to earn less money than men for each dollar. And this demographic earns even less depending on the racial demographic of the woman. Another aspect of this as well is at the time, slave labor was still being used, and these people were gaining money, slave owners were gaining money through the free labor of enslaved Black people and enslaved Africans. And because of this, we can still see in today's society how the net worth of white people is statistically much higher than the net worth of Black people in this nation or other ethnic minorities in this nation. And these effects come directly from the economic structure that existed in the past that utilized slave labor in order to gain financial freedom from Britain, gain financial advancement throughout the nation through the use of cotton and the use of other means. Another way that these financial structures created by the first Congress can still be sort of seen in today's society is the use of credit and the heavy dependence on credit that is commonplace in the United States because so many groups have so little money in comparison to the people who own all of the lines of credit and all of the um, major economic means of the nation, then the people who are poor have to constantly use credit and be indebted to those same people who are continuing to gain more money and create even bigger gaps of wealth disparity and reproduce those same systems that had existed back in the 1790s. Overall, the effects of these first initial financial structures and economic structures that were created in the 1790s um, have a clear effect on society still today and can still be seen reflected in the ways that we function, in the economic disparities that exist between those who are poor and those who are wealthy, those of one race versus another, and those of different genders in today's society also be seen in our banking systems and the ways that money is regulated throughout the nation and the inflation that still happens today for the dollar value and the worth of a dollar now versus what it is at a different time in the past or what it might become in the future.